The vanishing of Lindsay Jo Reimer. The town of Hebden Bridge, nestled in the quiet valleys of West Yorkshire, had always felt safe. The streets were narrow and winding, the old stone buildings standing tall, carrying whispers of centuries past. Life here moved slowly, predictably. But that changed on a cold November night in 1994. Lindsay Jo Reimer was 13 years old. She wasn't the type to run away, not the kind of child to vanish without a trace. She had a routine, a life built around school, home, and the little village shop where she was last seen alive. Her mother had sent her out that evening to buy a carton of milk. A simple task. One she had done before. But this time, she never came back. The streets that had always been familiar suddenly became endless. The houses, once warm and inviting, felt shadowed and empty. Someone had seen her at the shop. Someone had watched her walk away, into the cold. And then, nothing. Lindsay was gone. The search. At first, there was hope. Maybe she had been delayed. Maybe she had stopped to talk to a friend, lost track of time. But the minutes turned into hours. The hours into days. The police combed through the town, knocking on doors, questioning neighbors, searching the wooded paths and the narrow waterways. They brought in dogs, detectives, divers. The river that cut through the town was slow-moving, winding its way through the valley like a black ribbon. The locals said it had a way of keeping secrets. But the weeks passed, and Lindsay was nowhere to be found. Her mother called out to her every night, standing in the doorway of their home, begging for her child to come back. But all she got in return was silence. Hebden Bridge was changing. The people no longer trusted the streets. Children were watched more closely. Doors were locked a little earlier. And always, the question remained, where was Lindsay? And then, after 5 long months, the river finally spoke. The discovery. April 12, 1995. A man walking along the Rochdale Canal spotted something tangled in the reeds, just beneath the murky surface. Something that didn't belong. The divers pulled her out gently, but the water had already done its damage. Lindsay's body had been hidden beneath the surface for months, the cold preserving what little was left. Her pink sweater, the same one she had worn the night she disappeared, clung to her small frame. Her family's worst nightmare had come true. She hadn't run away. She had been taken. The post-mortem confirmed it, Lindsay had been murdered. But the water had erased the evidence, washed away the fingerprints, carried away the DNA. The one thing they did know? She had been kept somewhere before she was killed. She hadn't been in the water for 5 months. Someone had hidden her. Held her. Kept her away from the world until the time came to dispose of her. And just like that, the case grew darker. Theories and shadows. Who took Lindsay? Who kept her locked away in the time between her disappearance and her death? The police had suspects. Some believed it was someone she knew, a family friend, a trusted adult. Someone she wouldn't have feared, someone who could lure her in without a struggle. Others pointed to strangers passing through, men with dark histories and wandering eyes. There had been reports of a suspicious figure that night, someone watching from the shadows, someone who never came forward. Then there were the whispers, the ones that never made it to the news. People in town spoke of a house in the hills, hidden from the main roads. A place with boarded-up windows, where lights flickered at odd hours. A place where strange sounds had been heard, cries in the night, the kind that didn't belong to animals. Was Lindsay kept there? Did she stare out through a crack in the boards, watching the world go on without her, knowing she would never make it back home? The police searched, but nothing was found. And the one person who knew the truth, the one who had watched Lindsay in those last moments, who had held the weight of her small body before letting it sink into the cold, never spoke a word. The curse of unsolved crimes. The years passed. The streets of Hebden Bridge grew older, but Lindsay's face never changed. She remained 13 forever. Her parents never stopped searching for answers. Her mother still speaks of her as if she might walk through the door at any moment, a child frozen in time, always just on the other side of memory. The case remains open. But the weight of it lingers in the air, in the houses, in the empty roads where Lindsay once walked. Some say her spirit never left the town. That on certain nights, if you listen closely near the riverbank, you can hear footsteps on the stone path. Soft. Barely there. Some have seen a figure standing near the water's edge, a girl in a pink sweater, staring into the blackness. Waiting. Searching. For the person who took her. For the truth that was stolen. For someone to finally listen to the whispers. And one day, they will. The haunting of Ellen Greenberg. It was a winter evening in January 2011 when Ellen Greenberg's life came to a brutal, inexplicable end. She was 27 years old. A beloved teacher, an only child, recently engaged, and in the prime of her life. She was supposed to get married. She was supposed to build a future. But instead, she was found dead in her Philadelphia apartment, slumped against her kitchen cabinets, her body riddled with 20 stab wounds, including 10 to the back of her head and neck. The scene was gruesome. A knife still embedded in her chest. Blood pooled around her. The walls, once a warm, neutral tone, were now streaked with the evidence of something horribly, undeniably wrong. At first glance, it was a brutal homicide. And yet, it was ruled a suicide. The discovery. The timeline of that night is disturbing. Ellen had left work early due to a blizzard sweeping through the city. She had spoken to her parents earlier that day, nothing unusual, nothing alarming. At 6:30 p.m., her fiancé, Sam Goldberg, returned home from the apartment gym. The door was locked from the inside with a swing bar latch, something that could only be secured from within. He called Ellen's name. No answer. He pounded on the door. Still, nothing. Frustrated, he texted her. Hello? Open the door. What the F asterisk? You better have an excuse. I'm getting pissed. Then, a call to security. Minutes later, the latch was broken, the door swung open. And Sam found Ellen's body in the kitchen. She was cold. Blood coated the floor. The knife was still in her chest. Panicked, he called 911. His voice trembled. My fiancé's covered in blood, she's not breathing. Paramedics arrived. They worked on her. But Ellen was long gone. And then, the questions started. A suicide. The first police reports labeled it a homicide. It was obvious. The number of wounds, 20 stab wounds, many deep, 10 of them in the back of her head and neck. Some wounds appeared hesitant, shallow, the kind an attacker might inflict in a frenzy. Blood was smeared across the counters, a disturbing sign that Ellen had tried to move after being attacked. The knife that took her life was still lodged in her chest. And yet, days later, the case took a chilling turn. After a suspicious second autopsy, after talks behind closed doors, after whispers between authorities, Ellen's death was officially ruled a suicide. A suicide. Despite the wounds to the back of her neck. Despite no history of self-harm. Despite the fact that no one had ever heard of a suicide like this. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't. Theories and cover-up? The locked door. The blood smeared in multiple places. The sheer violence of the attack. The unbelievable number of wounds. Who stabs themselves 20 times, 10 times in the back of the head? The Greenbergs, Ellen's devastated parents, refused to accept the official ruling. They hired private investigators, forensic analysts, and legal experts. What they found was disturbing. 1. The knife. The blade was plunged deep into Ellen's chest, something that would have made it nearly impossible for her to continue stabbing herself afterward. 2. Bruises. Older bruises were found on Ellen's body, signs of past abuse. 3. The blood patterns. The blood smears in multiple areas suggested movement, as if Ellen had tried to fight, to escape. 4. The lack of defensive wounds. If she had done this to herself, there would have been evidence of hesitation. Instead, some of the wounds were deliberate, forceful, final. 5. The locked door. Authorities argued that the door's swing bar latch proved no one else could have entered or left, but was that the truth? Could it have been staged? And yet, the ruling never changed. The Greenbergs were stonewalled at every turn. Records were sealed. Investigators refused to look deeper. Someone, somewhere, was making sure this case stayed buried. The unspoken fear. Philadelphia has secrets. And there are whispers, ones that no one wants to say out loud. That someone powerful was involved. That Ellen knew something she wasn't supposed to know. That her case wasn't mishandled by accident. And then, there's the question of Sam Goldberg. His behavior that night. The frustration in his texts. The way he called security first before ever calling 911. His complete lack of injury. If Ellen had fought, where were his wounds? But nothing stuck. He was never charged. Never even considered a suspect. And to this day, Ellen's case remains closed. The haunting truth. Ellen should be alive. She should have walked down the aisle. She should have lived a long life, teaching, laughing, breathing. Instead, she was silenced. And the people who buried her story? They walk free. Her parents still fight. Every year, they push for the case to be reopened, for someone, anyone, to listen. And still, the city stays quiet. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Sometimes, the dead find ways to speak. And one day, Ellen's whispers will be heard.